Mindset Mavericks, your blueprint for bold thinking and boundless growth.
Welcome to Mindset Mavericks. Today we're unlocking how to rewire the way you think to fast-track your career success. Our guest, Dagna Bieda, started out as a software engineer, but she realised pretty quickly that technical skills alone don't guarantee career success. After dealing with what probably a lot of us have dealt with, imposter syndrome, burnout, and self-doubt, she's cracked a code on what really makes a difference, your mindset. Now she's a career coach helping tech professionals reprogram how they think so they can break past mental roadblocks and land the careers they actually want. So if you've ever felt stuck, unsure of your next move, or like you're standing in your own way, this episode's for you. So welcome and thank you for being on Mindset Mavericks.
Thanks so much for having me here, John. I'm super excited for this conversation.
So as I've just mentioned, you started off doing your software engineering career. So what was it that made you realize that mindset and not skill set was actually a thing that's holding people back?
You know, I experienced it myself firsthand. Back in 2018, I ended up landing in therapy because I burned myself out. I was experiencing depression. There was some complicated grief sprinkled on top from basically moving abroad. I moved from Poland to United States. On September, I just realized I needed help. And going through therapy, having conversations with someone who really understood what it is that I was going through helped me see the parallel between what I did in my day job as a software engineer and the human brain. Because therapy is nothing but debugging, but of your mental code, right? Because you go and revisit the thoughts that are running through your head, the belief system that you have, the past experiences that shape you who you are today. And that's exactly how code is created. And, you know, that parallel, once I saw it, once it clicked, I could not unsee it.
I think particularly with, let's say, high-flying tech career and things, it can be kind of frowned upon, or maybe there's stigma around going to see therapists. Did you find that at all, or was it quite a comfortable, easy thing for you to do?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm totally the type, or I used to be the type, where I was like, therapy? Psh, I don't need this. But on that September day, I entered to my office, you know, thinking of myself as a professional, someone who can hold their feelings at bay and not let them get overwhelmed by those feelings. And I'm in a one-on-one meeting with my manager. We're talking, you know, the regular stuff, career progression, my goals, how things are going, team dynamics and whatnot. And we dive into this conversation where all of a sudden I just burst into tears. And I'm still kind of embarrassed to really share that story at times. I myself was shocked. Like, where is this coming from? Like, this is not me. What? I'm at work, you know? And the reason I ended up in therapy is because my manager shared her therapist info. And seeing someone who I admired, who I thought did really well in her life, and I wanted to kind of be like her, you know, I thought if someone who I admire ended up in therapy and it helped them, maybe it's worth considering too. And it was a really phenomenal decision, because the moment I realized that having conversations, honest, open, vulnerable conversations with someone who gets you can be a real life changer. In the past of just a couple of months of me being really open to all the feedback that I got from my therapist, she changed my life. Having conversations changed my life, because it was just talk therapy. I didn't take any sort of medication or anything like that. It was just talking and really debugging, untangling that spaghetti code sitting in between my ears and that mental legacy code. And that's when it clicked. You know, I became an engineer because I wanted to have impact. And after having conversations with the therapist, who did help me a ton, I realized that that's the kind of impact that I really want. So it was no longer the technical impact of, you know, deploying apps and having millions of users use it, but it was this tremendous impact that I could make on another person's life just through having deep, honest conversations. And that's why I transitioned to being a coach.
So yeah, it really is a life-changing moment from therapy. I think it's probably quite a familiar story as well, which people only realise they've got to burn out when it does reach that breaking point and something happens which might just tip you over the edge of where you're comfortable. So what were some of the signs that you were seeing that you were in that phase of burnout?
So with the burnout, the tricky thing is that you don't just wake up one day and realize, oh, I'm burned out. Okay. It kind of creeps up on you, and it's really hard to see it as it's sneaking up on you. There are quite a few things to be aware of. And if it's okay, I would love to read a little piece of my book because I have a whole chapter written about burnout. Is that okay if I read a little bit?
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you.
All right. So essentially, when it comes to burnout, here are some things that you might be feeling or experiencing if you're actually having it. You might be feeling totally drained. It's like you're running on empty, both physically and emotionally. The usual energy and enthusiasm for things just disappeared. Maybe you're feeling completely ineffective. You don't seem to feel like you're making a difference, and you're likely questioning the point of it all. Or maybe you get easily annoyed and little things get on your nerves more than they used to, which might put a strain on your relationships with others. Or you're cynical. You might find yourself becoming more negative about work, people, and life in general. Or maybe you want to isolate yourself. Maybe your performance falls off the cliff. Or things that used to be fun or pleasurable or intellectually stimulating are just no longer bringing you joy. Another reason or another way to notice that you might be experiencing burnout is that you mask your misery with temporary thrills, right? And that's a sign that things are actually really tough. Are any of these feeling familiar to you, John?
Yeah, I can definitely resonate with some of those, and I think I've certainly led some really high pressure jobs and felt some of those. And I think it's the way I'd kind of describe it is that life should be vibrant and full of color, and it's like everything just switches to black and white.
It's like
and goes grayscale. Yeah, just a bit of a numbness. So that's how I've experienced it. And I can definitely resonate with some of the things you've read out there. I think it's even though you've gone through burnout, you started therapy, it's still quite a brave decision to do such a big pivot. So what kind of fears or doubts did you have when you were stepping away from software engineering into coaching?
You know, the fact that I was really great at engineering kind of made it easy because my last manager told me that I was the best engineer he's ever worked with. So that kind of reaffirmed my belief in myself that if I go into entrepreneurship and totally miserably fail, I can always go back to engineering. Yeah. So having that kind of cushion really helped in terms of like psychological safety. But I also didn't just decide, hey, I'm going to be a coach, and then left my job and focused on coaching. In reality, I did it in parallel. So having been a software engineer, I slowly started coaching people on the side and noticed that I was really able to help them transform in a short period of a time frame. And so once I was able to monetize from the coaching services, I made that leap. And actually, there was one more step that my husband and I took before I fully leaped into entrepreneurship, which was to create passive income. So we ended up putting our money into 2 Airbnbs to have some cash flow. So, while I was ramping up in my business, we knew that at least the Airbnbs are going to bring some money in. Of course, it didn't cover my software engineer's salary, but it was a good start. And again, a safety cushion. So I try to make that transition as easy as possible for myself.
I think already just in that little segment, I've learned one lesson. As soon as you said that you were told you're the best engineer he's ever had, immediately I thought, actually, that's even more scary. You're giving something up you know you're good at, you know you're competent, you're confident, and you're successful in, to go and try something completely different. But the way you phrased it, and the fact is you can go back to it, is a great way of looking at it. It's a great perspective to have.
I don't see coaching as being that much different because I like to say that I moved from programming computers to reprogramming human minds, which is what I do with my clients. So in my book, Brain Refactor, I really explore how human brain is kind of similar to computer software, and whatever is not working, you can reprogram it. Except, with the computer, whenever you type in on the keyboard, what you do is you examine file by file, line by line, and you change specific files, specific lines in order to change the output of your apps that you create as a software engineer. In the case of the brain, what you do is you examine your thoughts, your beliefs, your habitual thought patterns, and those are the ones that you debug.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I love the idea of the analogies linking it up to coding as well and how that works. So when you're talking about comparing career transformation to refactoring code, how does that actually work there, and how can somebody start applying that today?
So the very first thing that I want you to realize is that the thoughts that we have are not true. And a lot of the time we see it with code too, where you create a code base, it's a legacy code, and a piece of code was created at a certain point in time to solve a specific problem. But as years have passed, this might be outdated and no longer serving the purpose that it was meant to serve when it was put in. And the same thing happens with our beliefs. So for example, let's say if you listening were a kid giving a presentation at school and other kids laughed at you, your brain might have interpreted that situation as dangerous and put in a limiting belief, it's better if I don't present so I don't humiliate myself, right? And it served the perfect purpose when you were back in school. But now, 20, 30 years later, in your professional career, you realize in order for me to be seen as the valuable professional that I am, I have to present. I have to lead meetings, give presentations, get comfortable with speaking in public. That's such a valuable skill. So when I work with clients who have that particular set of beliefs, we go in, understand kind of the code, when it was put, why was it put in place, what was the protective reason that it came about, and we refactor it. We change that code, we change that set of beliefs. So now as an adult, you can actually feel more comfortable public speaking, for example. I hope that makes sense.
Perfectly. And I think it is a great analogy, because if you could debug in code, you don't go and throw away the whole code if there's a problem with it. You do go in and you make tweaks and you refine it and just try and improve it for future use. And you keep doing that and refining it and checking back over the code. So you don't just get rid of it, and you do try and improve it. I think you said something similar, which was the limiting beliefs about, for example, I can't do public speaking. I've tried it before and I'm rubbish at it. And I think one of the most powerful ways to rephrase it is, I can't do whatever that is yet. Just add the word yet to everything. And it's just giving yourself that ability to think, I can't do it at the moment, but there's potential for the future. So again, it's just one of those little tweaks to try and change that mindset and start making it that you are malleable and you can change, and give yourself permission to change.
Yes, and neuroplasticity, neuroscience tells us that we can change our brains at any point in life, And I like to also give this analogy of, the fact that you have a brain in your head and you have a phone in your pocket. When is the last time that your phone updated its software, where the software would be kind of like the thoughts, the beliefs, everything that's going on in your head, right? With our phones, it happens automatically. We don't even think about it. With the software update, it happens in the background, and then you have the hardware upgrade as well. So with the hardware upgrade, how do you upgrade your phone? You go into the store and basically get a new version of that model. But when is the last time that you've upgraded the hardware of your brain? Because if you want to have an efficient brain, you need to take care of both the software side and the hardware side. With the software, again, being the thoughts and the beliefs that are stored in here, and the hardware being the actual physical structure of your brain. So for the software updates of your brain, the phenomenal tools are therapy, and coaching. Or if you want to do some DIY, journaling is a phenomenal tool to kind of like understand what is happening here. What is this code producing right now? And is it serving you or is it not serving you anymore? Did that feature become a bug, right? With the hardware, the best way to think about improving your brain's hardware, so the actual physical structure, is by improving your diet, getting exercise, getting sleep, or something that I really love and I discovered just a few years back, doing a neurofeedback training. I realized that optimizing my brain on a hardware level made the software upgrades so much more efficient, if that makes sense.
I'm fascinated to learn a bit more about the neurofeedback. So what is that and how does anyone do that?
So basically, you have to find a biofeedback clinic in your area and you go in for initially a brain scan. They will put like a little hat on your head, which will analyze the frequencies that your brain is running on. And a lot of the time, a lot of the problems that we experience with our brain in the modern society is essentially the brain being out of sync with itself. There's about 55 areas of the brain called Brodmann areas that can be mapped based on those measurement of frequencies. And a skilled clinician can tell you which things are out of sync. In my case, for example, when I went in, it turned out that the front of my brain and the back of my brain were working at a completely different frequencies, which would tire my brain way faster than it needed to, right? So in the first thing, what you do is you kind of do a brain scan to understand what is misaligned and what could be improved based on the frequencies of the brain. The second step is actually creating a protocol, which the biofeedback clinic would create for you as a patient or client, and then going through with the sessions. And the sessions are marvelous. They're super simple because you just go in for an appointment and you watch TV. So here's what happens as you watch TV. The screen of the movie that you're watching, and you can watch whatever you like, doesn't have to be anything smart. It will either change the size or dim the brightness or change the volume of what it is that you're listening to. That will create a micro penalty for your brain because as you're watching, there's a real-time feedback of frequencies coming into the computer. The computer is then seeing whether your brain acts like we want it to act or not. If it doesn't, then there's a penalty. So changes that brain doesn't like. But on a conscious level, you don't have to do anything. You just watch TV and your brain improves itself based on those cues.
That's fascinating. It's just not something I've ever experienced or heard much about before. So what did that in real terms do for you once you'd gone through that process?
So I realized that there were some areas of my brain that, or some triggers in my environment that would really quickly trigger me, right? So say I'm a mom, I have small kids, and if my baby would cry, I would feel this alarm in my body and I had to drop whatever it is that I was doing and attend to the baby. That would be one of the things. And that alarm was really intense. Like I could not focus on anything but making sure that the trigger is taken care of. At times, having a crying baby would completely overwhelm me because the alarm kept ringing, even though I was working towards taking care of the baby, right? So after having gone through the neurofeedback training, I was no longer feeling that sense of alarm. So I was able to realize, okay, you need attention and I'll take care of you. But there was no rush of hormones through my body like cortisol or adrenaline. And I was able to actually still be in my prefrontal cortex, the logical part of my brain, instead of being in the amygdala, which is like this limbic system. Now, I don't want to get too deep into neuroscience here, but the changes were really mind-blowing. And that's just one of the examples of not being as easily triggered by certain situations.
And that sounds fascinating, and it sounds though it would work for triggers such as anxiety or stressors and quite a few different scenarios, and that could definitely make a big difference.
It's actually, neurofeedback is this new cool kid on the block, and a lot of doctors don't even know such a thing exists because it's so new and cutting edge. But it's often recommended for people with ADHD, anxiety, depression, sleep disorders, eating disorders, any sort of addictions, because all those issues come from a dysregulated brain. And neurofeedback helps regulate the brain and increase its resilience by making the hardware work better.
To having their brain scans and going through this process. I think you probably touched on some of them already, but what are some of the big, say, 3 mental bugs that you see in people you're working with? And what are some of the ways that we can go about rewriting them?
So the first bug that I see, we did talk a little bit about burnout. And I think the bugs that I had that I also commonly see that led me to burnout was perfectionism, hard work bias, and not having boundaries in place. And those are the bugs or mental inefficiencies that I help my clients with, right? So with perfectionism, it's okay to be a high achiever and set the bar high. But what perfectionism does is that it makes you obsessed on the outcome, not the journey. And that can be devastating. That can have horrible effects, leading you towards burning yourself out or depression, like it did in my case. There's also the hard work bias, where you often put a lot of value on the things that are difficult. And so you will probably make yourself work way harder than you need to in order to achieve the kind of success you're going after. And that's one I commonly see. And then the boundaries, having boundaries in place, understanding how boundaries work and why they're necessary and important, and becoming aware of whether or not you have healthy boundaries in place. That these are the 3 that I commonly see, especially as it relates to burnout. Now, there's also other few mental bugs that trigger, for example, imposter syndrome. And I am actually currently creating a free email course that will help people get past imposter syndrome in under 3 months, because I've done it with my clients over and over again. So I know exactly how the process works. And that will dive a little bit more into the details on how specifically the imposter syndrome bugs look like and how to refactor them out.
Funnily enough, where I was going to be going next is about imposter syndrome. So I think in a tech field, especially, there's a lot of high achievers, whether it's at top schools in whatever country you're based in. And there's so many people that do secretly feel like they don't belong. Is there a powerful way to stop feeling like a fraud?
Yes. So I want anyone listening who is experiencing imposter syndrome to realize that the thoughts that you're thinking are not true. They're just leftover legacy code printing out some basically trash. So don't trust your thoughts, number 1. Number 2, the imposter syndrome is really this set of routines in your mind that sends you down a spiral. A little bit of doubt, a little bit of worry is completely normal and healthy, because it helps us foresee any sort of risks and make good decisions. We need to worry and doubt ourselves from time to time. Now, the difference from the regular doubt and worry and having the imposter syndrome is what happens when you get triggered, right? How does your internal chatter look like? Do you spiral down into the rabbit hole that makes you feel absolutely horrible, maybe overwhelms you from taking further action? Or maybe if you get a promotion, you get so overwhelmed, you decide to step down, which I've seen many times, right? For experienced engineers becoming managers or team leads, and then feeling like this is totally out of their depth. And then they go back to being an engineer because they feel so uncomfortable. And so the other approach that I highly recommend is, instead of allowing that imposter syndrome to kick in and completely let you spiral out of control in a way that's damaging to your career and life, instead of doing that, I recommend leaning into growing pains. If you ever talk to a 3, 4, or 5-year-old or a teenager, you realize that a lot of the time when their body is growing, their bones hurt, right? Their growth. This is uncomfortable. And the same thing happens as we experience personal and professional growth. It's uncomfortable. It hurts on an emotional level. There are things that you do that you don't want to do. But the question is, how is your internal chatter, internal conversations, how does that look like, right? Again, does it send you down the spiral? And that's when you're dealing with the imposter syndrome? Or are you able to realize, have this reality check, like, what I'm doing is hard. I am new at this, but I can figure this out, which is the case of leaning into growing pains, which is something that I help my clients implement in their daily life. And I've seen that increases resilience and can be done in a relatively short time frame, which is just under 3 months.
I think that's really interesting. I think it is, a lot of people think that confidence will come from outside validation, but a lot of the time it is what you say to yourself and how you talk to yourself. So it's just about having those, how you think to yourself, and you might have all these negative thoughts, and it's trying to treat yourself you would with your best friend. So think about your thoughts and how would you be speaking to your best friend if they were having those same thoughts. But yeah, I think a lot of it is definitely to do with self-talk.
One thing that I like to do with my clients is to do a thought audit. And basically what it means is that for a day, you write down every single thought that you have as much as possible, right? And after you've done so, you share that, say, Google Doc with me, and then we analyze which ones are just repeating patterns, which ones are no longer true, and how you could potentially reprogram them, right? Having that kind of thought audit is incredibly powerful because our thoughts affect us, right? The thoughts that we have create our state. So let me explain this. For example, if you were to imagine right now that you're biting into a yellow, super juicy lemon that you just pulled down from a tree, you might notice feeling that flavor of a lemon in your mouth. But you haven't bitten into a lemon as we're having this conversation, right?
I was right there.
Right, exactly. Yet your body went into that state as a result of the thoughts that you had. And so it's really important to think about it because our thoughts trickle down to our state that informs our actions and behaviors, how we show up in the world, and what happens around us. So we don't always have control over what is happening around us because life can be difficult and hard and scary, but we do have control over how we react to those situations happening around us. And it starts with our thoughts. It starts with understanding, noticing, and shifting our body state. And that's what I help my clients with.
Sounds like a really great task to do, where you do write down all of your thoughts. But I'd imagine that can be quite a scary process as well, and having to re-examine how you think of yourself and the thoughts you're having. So is there things you can say that helps people put ego aside and do that with vulnerability? Because I could imagine trying to be honest and putting everything down is quite a scary process.
Yes, I love that you're bringing it up because psychological safety is key, right? You won't be able to dive into the code if you're afraid to see what you might find, right? And so one way that I like to think about it, and why this analogy of brain being similar to computer software is so powerful, is because if you're able to see your thoughts and beliefs as a repository of code, it means it's separate from who you are at your core, at your essence. You know, some people would call it your soul. Some other people would call it something else. I like to use the word essence. And your essence is not your mental legacy code. Your mental legacy code that's sitting in between your ears was kind of like, you know, we talk a lot about AI these days, and AI is trained on data sets, right? And your brain has been trained on your lived experience, on what happened to you. It's a product, it's a result of that lifetime of a training. And so if you see it as separate again from your essence and as something that you have full control over, now, I never said it was going to be easy, but you do have control over it and you can change whatever it is that you're trying to change. That makes it so much easier. You know, a lot of the time I see that when I'm working with my clients, their defenses just drop because there's this psychological distancing. I am not my mental programming. I'm something more, something greater, something that has power over how to reprogram whatever's not working. And we get deep real quick. And that's how I'm able to help my clients achieve really big transformations in such a short time frame, because I work with people together for 3-4 months. That's my coaching package.
Yeah, it sounds like you have really, really deep and close connections with the people you're working with. And I'm intrigued about building relationships and communication. And I think, again, not to stereotype too much, but in tech, it's kind of seen as people who aren't necessarily the most socially. You want
to say introverts, right? You do want to say that.
Okay, introverts. And it can be quite difficult to build up connections and particularly around networking as well when you're meeting people for the first time. So what's a good way of trying to network without bringing the cringe to it?
Yeah. So one of the things that I teach my clients is how can you market yourself with integrity, with things that you actually truly believe that are factual, right? Like, what's the value that you bring as a professional? It's so easy to talk about the things that you actually believe in, right? That's number one. Number two is we examine what kind of mental models you have around relationships, around marketing yourself. We examine those mental models because, again, they were just a byproduct of your lived experience and you can change them. So we do exactly that. Examine what is it that you believe to be true and see how those things, how those mental models are holding you back and what needs to be reprogrammed. So, for example, one of my clients that I talk about in my book, because it contains a few case studies of people I actually worked with, describes a person who had a massive social anxiety, which was horrific in an interview setting, but it also affected his personal relationships and just the ability to make friends. He was so anxious in social situations that once we were able to understand how his mental models have been constructed and reprogram them, he told me that his anxiety levels dropped by 80%, and he was just so comfortable now approaching others and talking to them and making friends that, you know, the coaching basically changed his life. Obviously, he did the work, and that's why he achieved that kind of incredible result. My goal was to guide him using this framework that we're talking about here today.
I'm intrigued because you have worked with so many people and coached a lot of people through a lot of different lived experiences. Are you able to give information about the types of issues that individual was facing? Was it from past trauma? Are you able to give any more detail about what it was that you had to overcome to enable that to happen?
So in terms of how I work with my clients, again, we just examine the mental models. I am not a therapist. I'm a coach. Therapists are the one who label things, who tell you that you have a type of a disorder. My role as a coach is just to observe and help you understand how your programming came to be and how it's impacting what it is that you do currently. So I don't really use those kinds of labels, right? Because with trauma, we have the big T trauma and the small T trauma. And, you know, an experience that I mentioned earlier where your school colleagues make fun of you at school setting could be a small T trauma, right? I don't really label those when I work with my clients. Now, if someone has experienced a really traumatic event and they know it has been a traumatic event, they would probably be better served working with therapists first and then reaching out to a coach. The main difference that I see between therapy and coaching is that if you were to reduce your mental state to a number on a scale from -5 to 5, what therapists do is they take you from this -5 state where you're suffering, and they try to bring you to around 0, which is like considered to be healthy, normal, typical, what you'd expect, right? What coaches do is they take you from your 0 to the +5, moving you towards your peak performance in career and life or relationships, depending on what kind of coach you work with. So if you know there has been big trauma in your life, you're probably better served working with a therapist first, healing those wounds, and then moving on to a coach.
Perfectly explained. Thank you. What I wanted to go on to was the kind of invisible rules question. So a lot of people in tech follow the kind of playbook, get a degree, climb the ladder, follow all the rules. Is there one piece of advice, conventional career advice, that you think people should be ignoring?
That is such a great question. And in terms of ignoring rules, I would say figure out what works for you first. What is it that you deeply, truly care about? And then move on from there. That's how you ignore the rules, right? If the society tells you A, but you truly believe B, and that's your values, that's things that you deeply care about, follow your core values rather than society. You know, one of the things you mentioned, following society, one of the things that I notice is that it's the autopilot living, right? We have our family, the country that we grew up in, create this kind of pressure about doing things a certain way. And if those things are not in alignment with who we are, and we force ourselves to act out of integrity and against of what we truly value, that's how we push ourselves into burnout. That's how we lose motivation. That's how we wake up one day being paid a 6-figure salary, feeling like, oh, I hate it, right? So it's really about understanding of who you are and what it is that you want out of life, and how you can create the kind of opportunities for yourself that align with those core values that you have inside.
Really, it's exactly what you did with your transition. So that process, going from employee to an entrepreneur, you went from working, I say 9 to 5, to running your own coaching business. What's the biggest misconception about that transition?
A biggest misconception.
I think there's always fears from people that more so about what you're giving up, and fear of change. And what was your actual experience of making that change?
It was hard. But I would say everything in life worth doing is hard. From getting married, to having kids, to traveling the world, to staying close with people that you care about. Everything worth doing in life is hard. And the one thing that is my driving principle is to feel that I've taken every opportunity I could to live this life to the fullest and not have regret on my deathbed.
So it's all been worth it so far, the transition, and you're not feeling burnout, you're feeling like you're being your authentic self.
On the contrary, I would say that I went from being this burned out self to feeling fully alive and motivated, even though there's so much going on in my life. It feels that I have my purpose, and being aligned with what it is that I truly value helps me stay motivated, helps me get into flow states and have a true impact on what it is that I do with my clients through my book, Brain Refactor, as well as in my coaching practice.
And I'm just coming towards the end, but there is a couple of questions I wanted to pose to you, and it's just to get to know you a little bit more and see some of the things that you do which help with your mindset on a daily basis. And the first one I wanted to ask about, and I know you've got your book, but is there any particular book that's changed everything for you? Something that's had a massive impact on how you see the world and your mindset?
Well, there's quite a few. So one of them is The Happiness Trap by Ruth Harris. Really absolutely love that book. It helped me understand the default setting of the mind, and what are like the fact that the thoughts are not true, which is something that I love getting back to, because I didn't know that. For the first 30 years of my life, I just thought that every thought I thought was true. And I acted from that place, which, led me to, like we talked earlier, to being burned out, depressed, and so yeah. The Happiness Trap is one of those books. The next one that I really love is Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself by Dr. Joe Dispenza. And he is really masterfully describing what we talked about a little bit with this lemon example of how your thought creates a bodily state. And he goes really deep into like the physiology of the process and beautifully explains it. So that was something eye-opening, because I'm an engineer and I studied robotics and computer programming, not really human brains. So understanding how human brain works as a system helped me not only use that knowledge to live a better life for myself, but also guide my clients into doing exactly that. And then one book that I really loved too was How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan, which talks about psychedelics. And I ended up in my own personal growth journey doing psychedelics as well. And it was incredible. It was like the cherry on top of all the personal growth work I've done. But I feel like my experience was pretty unique in the sense that I've done therapy, I've done coaching, I've done neurofeedback. So I optimize my brain on the software level. I optimize my brain on the hardware level. And so when I did the psychedelics, I was ready to really receive a lot of incredible lessons. So much so that I don't think I'll ever do psychedelics again.
Yeah, some great recommendations. And I think psychedelics are one that I've heard a lot about, and there's been some big podcasts that I listen to speaking about them recently. But again, I don't know a huge about it myself. I think that second book in particular sounds fascinating to me, so I'm looking forward to reading that one. It sounds similar to me as The Body Keeps the Score. I don't know if that's one that you've heard, but yeah, it makes me think it might be similar to that, but I'm fascinated to read into that one. So the second question, sorry. So do you have a personal daily habit to set you up for the day, a non-negotiable that gets you in the right mindset for the day ahead?
Yes. So I've trained my mind to get into a flow state whenever I'm working, which is putting my headphones on and playing a specific background sounds. I like to use the website called A Soft Murmur, and it's this mix of rain sounds with a little bit of thunder that really helps me get into this flow state. So every time, whenever I get to my computer, I make sure that my phone is out of sight, so it's not distracting me, and I get into the zone immediately by putting my headphones on with that set of ambient sounds.
There's loads of great recommendations. So I'll make sure I put all of it in the description anyway, so people can check these out. And what is the biggest life or business lesson that you wish you'd learned sooner?
I wish I had done neurofeedback training sooner. There's so many things I can pinpoint in my life that happened as a result of just the hardware of my brain being inefficient and my brain working against me and sabotaging me. So if I had known of this modality before, I would have done it and paid for it with my very first paycheck, because it changed so much my life. I mean, think about it. Your brain is at the center of everything that you do. So when you improve your brain, everything else improves too.
Another great recommendation. I think there's so many tips now to level up our brains that all of our listeners should be following. And the final question for you is around the Mindset Mavericks Hall of Fame. Is there one person you would nominate to put into the Mindset Mavericks Hall of Fame? Who would it be and why?
If you could get Dr. Joe Dispenza on the show, that would be absolutely incredible. I would love to have heard an episode with him on the show.
There you go. That's my next goal set. So what I'd like to do, Dagna, is we always wrap up with a powerful thought at the end and give you a chance to give you an opportunity to say, if you could leave the audience with one sentence or something to shift their mindset to carry with them throughout this week, what would it be?
You are not your mental programming. You can change that, update that, and create the kind of outcomes that you want in your life by reprogramming your mental code.
Amazing. And if anyone wants to find out a little bit more about yourself, or they want to purchase your book, where's the best place to do those things?
So the best place to find me is on LinkedIn. Just find Dagna Bieda on LinkedIn, or you can just click on the link in the show notes. And my book, Brain Refactor, has been an Amazon's bestseller, and you can find it on Amazon.
Perfect. Thank you very much for joining me.
Absolutely. Thanks, John, for having me today.